Most people discovered this story somewhere in the middle. A Bugatti Chiron torn apart in a workshop, being rebuilt piece by piece by someone who had no business pulling it off. But to understand why this moment actually matters, you have to go back to before any of that started. Before the crash. Before the rebuild. Before Matt Armstrong ever laid eyes on the car. Because this story doesn't begin in a workshop. It begins with a rejection. Alex G was already deep inside the world of Bugatti ownership. Not casually, he owned 2 of them. And by his own account, he was working toward a third. A Bugatti Mistral, one of the most exclusive convertibles the brand has ever produced. On paper, everything lined up. The money was there. The willingness to pay above sticker was there. The desire was clearly there. He even pursued direct contact with the brand, ready to close the deal. And then Bugatti said no. Not because of financing. Not because the car wasn't available. The rejection came down to something far more intangible, a quiet internal judgment that this particular expansion of his ownership wasn't the right fit. From the outside, that reads like standard brand management. Luxury manufacturers do this. They curate their customer base, they protect image, they control who sits at the top of their allocation lists. It's a normal practice in that world. But what makes this specific rejection worth paying attention to is everything that came after it. Not long after that door closed, one of Alex's existing Bugattis was involved in a serious crash. The damage was significant, the kind that puts a hypercar firmly into salvage territory and, under most circumstances, ends its story entirely. A Bugatti Chiron isn't a car you send to a regular body shop. Its construction is so specialized, its components so tightly integrated and proprietary, that damage at this level essentially removes it from the world of normal repair. Bugatti builds these cars in a controlled ecosystem. Every element, the carbon fiber monocoque, the quad-turbocharged W16 engine, the bespoke electronics, exists within a structure designed to be maintained and repaired only within that ecosystem. When a car exits that structure, especially through damage this severe, the assumption is that it stays out. That assumption is exactly what Matt Armstrong decided to challenge. Matt's reputation was already built on taking on vehicles that most people considered unrestorable, flood cars, fire-damaged exotics, wrecked supercars that had been written off by insurance companies and abandoned by their owners. His approach isn't sentimental. He doesn't rebuild cars for nostalgia. He rebuilds them because he treats damage as a problem, and problems, by his reasoning, have solutions. You just have to be willing to break them down far enough to find one. A crashed Bugatti Chiron is a problem of extraordinary complexity. And that complexity is precisely what drew him in. What most viewers watching his channel see is the visible progress. Panels going back on, systems reconnecting, the car slowly returning to something that resembles what it once was. What's easier to miss is the depth of what's happening underneath all of that. Because rebuilding a car like the Chiron outside factory conditions doesn't just mean sourcing parts and bolting things back together. It means reverse engineering decisions made by teams of specialized engineers, working without access to the documentation those engineers created, and fabricating solutions from scratch when no replacement part exists or can be obtained. That's where Bob becomes central to the story in a way that commentary on this build often underestimates. Bob isn't background support. He isn't simply the person keeping the workshop tidy or handling secondary tasks while Matt focuses on the big picture. Bob is the fabrication backbone of this entire rebuild. When the structural damage to the Chiron required components that couldn't be purchased, ordered, or sourced through any conventional channel, Bob made them. Working from measurements, from analysis of what remained, and from decades of machining and fabrication experience, he produced parts at a level of precision that the build simply could not have progressed without. That's not a small thing. In a factory setting, the components Bob has fabricated would have been produced by dedicated teams with specialized tooling, quality controlled at every stage, and validated against engineering specifications. Bob is doing the equivalent of that work, largely alone, in a private workshop, without those resources. The fact that the build has continued to move forward at all is in large part a testament to what he's capable of. The dynamic between Matt and Bob reflects something that makes this rebuild function as well as it does. Matt operates at the level of vision and direction. He determines the approach, identifies the next obstacle, and pushes the build forward strategically. Bob operates at the level of physical execution. He takes the direction and makes it real. One without the other would produce a very different outcome. Matt without Bob would be a vision without the means to realize it. Bob without Matt would be exceptional skill without a clear path to apply it. Together, they've managed to keep a project moving that, by most conventional assessments, should have stalled entirely. Now, as the build approaches completion, something in the broader conversation around it has started to shift. Bugatti has been aware of this project. That's not speculation. A rebuild of this visibility, this scale, and this technical ambition doesn't escape the attention of a manufacturer whose cars are as carefully tracked and documented as Bugatti's are. Under Mate Rimac's leadership, Bugatti has been moving in directions that suggest a brand paying close attention to how its identity is perceived and evolving in the broader automotive landscape. The idea that a crashed Chiron being publicly rebuilt outside their system has gone unnoticed internally is incredible. And yet the response from Bugatti has been silence. That silence is worth examining carefully, because it isn't straightforwardly interpretable. It could reflect a calculated decision not to engage, understanding that any public statement, whether supportive or critical, immediately changes the narrative of the build and draws more attention to the fact that one of their cars exists in this liminal space, outside their control. It could reflect a more nuanced position, watching the outcome before deciding how to respond, reserving judgment until there's something concrete to respond to. Or it could simply reflect institutional indifference, a company focused on its own roadmap, unbothered by what happens to a car that's already outside their ecosystem. What it almost certainly doesn't reflect is ignorance. And this is where the full chain of events becomes impossible to look at as a series of unrelated moments. Go back to the beginning. Alex attempts to deepen his relationship with Bugatti through the purchase of a Mistral. Bugatti declines. That rejection doesn't remove Alex from the story, it redirects his position within it. Then comes the crash, which takes one of his Bugattis out of the controlled environment Bugatti depends on to manage its product lifecycle. Then comes Matt, who takes that damaged car and begins a rebuild that has now been followed by hundreds of thousands of people over an extended period of time. Pull those events apart and each one looks unremarkable. Put them together in sequence and they form something much more coherent. A chain of decisions, accidents, and responses that has produced a moment Bugatti almost certainly never anticipated or planned for. A Chiron, publicly disassembled, publicly rebuilt, outside their system, by people with no factory support, no official documentation, and no institutional backing, getting close to running again. When this car does run, and the build is now close enough that, if feels like the wrong word, the conversation is going to change. Right now, most of the discussion around this project is technical. People are focused on the fabrication challenges, the sourcing problems, the engineering decisions, the pace of progress. That's the frame the build exists in while it's still a project. But a running Bugatti Chiron that was once a crash salvage title and is now back on the road, that shifts the frame entirely. It becomes a story about what the boundaries of automotive repair actually are when someone with the right skills and the right partner is willing to push them. It becomes a story about the gap between a manufacturer's designed ecosystem and the reality of what's possible outside it. And it becomes, quietly, a story about control, about who gets to decide when a car's life is over, and what happens when someone disagrees with that decision and proves it with results. That question doesn't have a clean answer. Bugatti's position makes sense from a brand integrity standpoint. Their cars are engineered to standards that a private rebuild, however skilled, cannot fully replicate or verify. The concerns around safety, around the integrity of repaired structural components, around the reliability of a rebuilt W16, those concerns are legitimate. But the counterargument is sitting in Matt's workshop, and it's nearly finished. What started as one man's attempt to rebuild a car that most people said couldn't be rebuilt outside factory conditions has become something significantly larger than the car itself. It's a document of what private expertise can accomplish when it refuses to accept the limits defined by institutional control. It's a case study in the difference between "this can't be done" And this hasn't been done this way before. And it began, in the most unlikely way, with a rejection letter that had nothing to do with any of this. That's the thread that connects everything. And when the Chiron finally runs, that thread becomes the story.